doesn't disappear.
Okay, thanks for your patience.
I should. I'll give it 2 more days.
Let's see. Cool. Thanks for your patience. I'm slightly behind, I guess. Few things. So you have spent the last week, hopefully not only doing this, but some of it, creating issues and highlighting your potential interest areas. So thank you for this. So I went through all of those and organized them a bit. And look what priorities you guys selected. So it was quite interesting in terms of the diversity. So I think it's probably worthwhile, instead of pushing on with the substantive content of the course, like the serious games, to kind of get the organization right. And I think talking about the topics is, I think, quite important to see what you actually want to do, because we also have necessarily a time constraint. That is, we only have a given set of lectures, so we need to organize, see that we cluster you accordingly. But this based on, so basically I coded your complete selections, or largely, and but of course, from a pedagogical perspective, I'm striving to, shape the course in a certain way, so we don't have 5 talks about a given topic. Hence this brief session here. So basically encoding is as follows in the order of first come, first serve, in the order of issue, right? So the person first raised the first issue, and the priorities are set accordingly. So walking through this, most people get their first choice. And the color coding is as follows. Color coding just represents cases where 2 people should have the same choice, meaning there would be the obvious partners for a kind of team-based lecture or potentially report and so on, right? So that said, it doesn't necessarily need to be, but that's the preliminary outcome. So we have propaganda games well represented. Yes, that's good. Important, box ticked. There's decision making. 2 people picked decision making. No one knows that anymore? That's good. Yes. I'm just, in case someone said, hey, that's my name, but you encoded it wrongly, let me know, right? So I think I went with best effort here. So decision making, that would be an obvious topic to collaborate, right? So see it as an opportunity for collaboration. As I mentioned before, it's just a matter of organizing, exploring the topic, getting insight, and sharing this presentation. It's a really good experience to do that. Then there's the one person that came up with science education. The only reference to education I saw as a first priority in the first place. So this is an option. Right now, the person is somewhat alone, but we're working on this. Because you see that I clustered some or highlighted some selections here, so there may be an opportunity to link up. So, Jia Xing Li, is that correct? I don't know. Is she here?
She's not here.
She's not here. So I need to figure out if she wants to do it alone, firstly, or if she wants to pair up with someone else, or if we drag someone else in the pool. I think the topic is really important, science education, or education more generally, if that's a compromise, because we have a bit of clusters here. Game analysis. It seems to be quite exciting for selected people. That's good, yeah. So it's an important topic. So it's really about the analytics that are employed commonly in serious games that can be used for different purposes. So it's a bit like cross-cutting concern. So this is a bit more involved. I think it could warrant 3 people being involved. But Yingsu, that's you. I saw you pick awareness as a topic. And yes, I got excited because that's an important topic as well, right? So because no one else picked this really as a first choice. So if you feel inclined to probably together with someone else.
Yes. I want to change my mind.
Okay, completely? On that note, change your mind. That's right. You can actually change your mind. You guys figured it out. On the course Wikipedia, actually, there's editable sheets, a link to that precise Google Sheets entry that I just showed you. So feel free to potentially modify it, but please indicate what you changed so I can keep track. Makes versioning a lot easier from my perspective. But in principle, if you want to say, hey, could I change to awareness and so on? So basically responding to the points here. I think it would be great if we could reflect awareness because it's a big topic. And I think 2 would be enough on game analysis. And they picked decision making as a second choice, which is taken already as a first priority here. So I get back to you. So this is good, not bad. So the other selection is here. We have two people that are potentially interested in psychological effects. Yeah. So Thomas and Kai, if you want to work together, that's an option. However, Kai gave me a bit of an opening here. So because he pretty much listed all topics of the course in priority. So it's of course a brilliant wildcard for me. So if anything is not covered yet, there you go. So because there are some interesting topics here that of course would be random well. But if you guys want to do psychological effects together, potentially would be yours. You can discuss, refine, and indicate changes or preferences here, right? You say, now actually now I want to go for looking after this, because there's always this thing giving you, without context, any opportunity to choose, but here it's really about organizing this more systematically. But it's of course an important topic. Propaganda, no, hang on. Andre, he didn't get the first choice because they were taken, but he picked technology. See here, it's not here today. But that would be great. Technology is important, of course. What is used for serious games, right? So do you just use mobile devices? Do you use other forms of media and so on? Anyway, so important one. Vega went for news games. Yep, yep, cool. Keen? Still keen?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Perfect topic, super important. And it's super. There's a lot of those little news games coming in for particular reasons, they vanish again, so on. So there's an ample opportunity to find, evidence, like particular examples. So that's quite nice. And then you have, of course, the health cluster, and consisting of 3 people in this case, which Caroline is not here today, Nikolai is here, Clara is here as well. So yeah, a bit big. So I need to see if there's no. Hang on. And what did I do with Morten? That's right. He's also in the health and wellness cluster. So I'm wondering if there's possible to split off or fork a education cluster out from there. Right. So we have education and health. So see if you guys could organize accordingly. That could be sensible because doing 4 people on health, we could do it. But it means we need to really clearly delineate what you want to do, right? So, so if you, for example, look in the very specific area of health, like say dementia or whatever, that would be an angle, and then the other group looks more as physical impairments and so on. That could be an angle, but or fitness as an alternative. But so have a think about this and see if you want to stick to the choices or we refine this. So in any case, it would be 2 groups because it's simply too much to do it in one cluster. Okay, and that would be psychological effects. All right, there's some latecomer. Good. So you want to do science education?
Yeah.
You got an obvious match because we had one participant doing science education.
It's like, is it science education means education or like it's like related to the science? Because for example, Duolingo or like games to learn something.
That's right. So we differentiate them as follows. So science education is a subset or specialization of education. So it generally refers to kind of the hard science, if you like. So like main subjects or in English it's the STEM subjects. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if you have, education in this direction, or chemistry was a nice example where in the past physics, biology is also life sciences we allowed. But education is more general, right? So that's basically encompassing everything. And then generally you would expect a bit more, probably more discussion about theory of how you teach and so on. Of course, you get a bit of a supplementary lecture from us in this respect. But science education is more specifically down the science route. Right? So what can we do to train science in people better? Does it make sense?
It's like, for me, it's like gamified education is like more interesting, not the science education.
Then your cluster would be education, just education.
Just education.
Yeah. So because of course gamified is part of the title of this course, so we'll not get around that one. But no, it would be cluster education. Let's rephrase into education then, because we need someone in the education area anyway. See if we can mix it. What else did you pick? Propaganda, gone. Health, wellness, tricky. Psychological effects. Yeah, education. So that would be an angle we need to see with this cluster. It would be good if we could finalize discussion. Well, not this perhaps in the later part of this lecture, but ideally within this week, so you guys really know and can settle on what you want to do. for two reasons. One of them, so we actually know the number of groups, and then we can compare that with the remaining slots and so on, right? So see if we can actually make this happen. But also you can actually start looking at your topics, right? And kind of going for it a bit more involved. I also put out a tentative. That is, of course, very, very early. So is there, hang on, before we do this, is there anyone who's similar to you just now, who wants to throw in a change in their preferences? And now it's getting interesting, because we have all the latecomers coming in. The challenge there is now I need to see how I cluster them cleverly. So all right. So the ones we just discussed, see that you can organize yourself. So you can use either talk one-to-one, but since we don't do this in the modern world, you can use social media, such as Discord. We have the Discord channel there. You guys are aware everyone's on Discord? Yep, and the rest is there soon, I sense. Because we have the Discord channel there in Serious Games, you can just discuss it, right, and make acquaintance there and direct message you, whatever else. So use those tools to negotiate a bit, and kind of let me know either directly or via this this tool here, this spreadsheet, so we can then finalize the topics. But in any case, yeah, that's the rough overview. I think largely you got what you wanted, I hope. So with few exceptions, but there's little opportunity for refinement. So once you lodged your final preferences, that's good. I'll reiterate over it again. Perhaps you do it after the break or later, and finalize this as well. Okay, for the ones that have topics, then later on there is another one, another spreadsheet. It's called time slots, and this is roughly planned out. The available time slots that we actually have. That would be tricky. Right now it would be 11, but I suspect we're losing this one to ourselves, literally. So that's not available for you. But basically, as realistically from the 10th of February onwards, it would be kind of a run you would have. So I have 10 slots. So I make the best on finding 10 groups maximum, not more, not less, to fill it up. Or if we have less, no big deal. I can fill up another slot with other interesting, exciting topics you need to learn then. Or exam. But if you have too many groups, that would be tricky, of course. All right. But this applies mostly to the people that actually have, know what they want to do and have their group. So ideally, I wouldn't want to see too much jumping there. But the idea is also they are first come, first serve, so you can just enter it. There's a history in there, so we can see who entered something first and overrode someone else's preference. So hint. So we're big on versioning, but we're also big on interactivity. Anyway, that's just the feel. We have a spring break here followed by Easter, meaning even though we only have 1 week break in between, technically Easter falls on a Monday, and that's the very day we have today. So yeah, so we have basically 2 weeks off. Some of you may be excited about this. So, all right. So that's one of the organizational bits. So please see, you can talk to me as well, of course. I can be a bit coercive if I need to, but other than that, I prefer best effort on your part because you're old enough. The other thing, questions? Or requests other than me talking slower? Because I will not learn from that. Serious game. It's not good. All right. Cool, let's go with this. What else did I want to say? Yeah, we get there. So, okay, so you're probably wondering, okay, how is it actually happening, right? So you're giving a talk, lecture, whatever else. You did this certainly, mostly with respect, hopefully, to a given topic, right? So you did a kind of report or research paper, or you looked at, in our case, often software development, right? So in our case, as in Max, design is probably very different. It's probably an artifact. I don't know what the typical outcome would be. You provide a brief background often, and then you pretty much dive into it and show what you did, and what you achieved, and some fancy GUIs and so on. That's pretty good. So how do we do it here? It's of course similar but slightly different, because the main difference is that most likely you're not talking about work you did. You're talking about work other people did primarily. And again, that's a very common pattern that you have in your master thesis, right? So it's also where you have a considerable chunk of pages dedicated to other people, not so much yourself. In contrast to project reports, where it's really about what you did. So In order to get this right, in order to kind of set a bit of an understanding, put out a bit of a idealized structure here. It doesn't need to follow this, and also depends what you want to do, but we get to that in a second. But generally what we would expect you to do is to provide for a given field, for example, education, or gamification in education, serious games in education, a bit of a motivation, why it's used, why it's useful, right? So last time we saw the Oregon Trail, and the evidence purpose there was to bring youngsters into, showing some interest for history, right? Especially their history. But the idea is also to draw a bit on the history of the field itself, right? As we talked about it, it's kind of weird that we put a serious games course in a Master of Applied Computer Science, because there's very limited need to only see it in the context of computer science, right? So it's a very open history. So it's good to talk about the history as well a bit, right? What has been done, how do you improve cognitive tasks, or what training mechanisms have been used in the past, or which other propaganda means have gamification effects perhaps in the past, who knows? And then the second part of this general overview would be to outline a bit of work that has been done before. There are various ways of doing this. This can be research papers that you say, those people said this, those people said this, and, well, a bit more structure getting there. But it can also be, and that's probably something that should come first, underlying theories. So if there's, for example, certain theories of education that have driven an entire cluster of papers in the area of gamification for education, well, then probably you want to lose a few words on this theory, right? So similar to, you may recall I talked about the MDA model, right? So basically just a model, but a lot of games actually orient themselves along this model, right? They look at the, what was the MDA model again? Why do I actually, I forgot, so please help me.
Lost.
Was that credible? Yes.
Mechanics, genomics.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. So did you say everything? No, you didn't.
No.
What did you miss?
Yeah, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics.
Aesthetics, that's right, the aesthetics. Good. Thank you. Both of you. So this would be a classical theory example, right? So again, you contextualize and embed whatever you have found, a specific example, right? So kind of go from general to specific. You can do it the other way around. Sometimes people take the motivational route, look at one really striking or popularized example and generalize from there. We give you this liberty. We go a bit more into this one. So, but in addition to this general overview, which is important, especially in the context of research and university education anyway, the idea is that you actually explore a specific paper or papers. Especially if you're multiple, it probably is worthwhile to consider, perhaps two papers, depending on the number of individuals. What is that about? Well, in addition to providing overview of the field, you want to pick one paper which you describe with greater scrutiny and actually read properly, and well, you read all of them properly. That you analyze more properly in the sense that you look at, what method did they apply, what data did they extract, and what conclusions did they draw, and everything kind of makes sense, right? You can, if you're keen on doing taking the analytical side, of course, and you probably should if the paper gives that away, check the stats. Do they actually make sense? Do you have representative samples? Do they use the right tests? What insights can you draw from this? And so on. So we had really last year quite some interesting insights that people found papers that had really, really strong claims, but a ridiculously low sample size of like 8 people, and drawing those very strong claims. So you have to be very, very careful in those ones. So that's really what it's about. Develop a bit more, kind of a rigorous treatment of papers, right, and looking at them carefully. But again, that's only for one paper or so. The thing is, though, you're not the only one looking at it, because everyone will look at this one. So this is basically on you, the group that basically presents it, and we discuss about this, of course, as well. But this specific paper is negotiated either with Runa or me. So we look at it in advance. So because there's a bit of a quality assurance mechanism. There's such diversity of different papers of very different quality. We just want to ensure that we introduce interesting or relevant ones into the course. And this one would be your case, that you basically elaborate explore, and everyone has read it, so meaning it's also basis for discussion in the class afterwards, right? People need to read and note down, for example, what they think the shortcomings are, the good aspects of the paper, and so on. So you want to see a bit of a discussion going. That worked really well in the past as well. And once the first group has presented in the first iteration, then people get how that actually works. So the first comer, of course, have a bit of a, they jump into the deep end of the pool, having limited priors. But on the other hand, of course, we take this into account as well. But in this paper, it's about looking at the paper itself, contextualizing it again, with theory. Which perhaps they're actually building on a theory or a model or whatever else that they didn't discuss. But you read from reading the paper, hang on, isn't that a particular psychological model that they actually refer to without making reference to? So it's a bit of an analytical opportunity there. And a classical one is basically what is good about the paper, what's not so good about the paper. And that can be both in terms of the content. So for example, what's the idea, the nature of the experiments, but it can also be conceptual, did they pick a good sensible theory for what they want to evaluate? Is the methods solid? Do they have a proper evaluation, sample size? And how did they present it, right? Is it really well structured, nicely readable? Do you have typos in there? Or there's very odd narratives going on, meaning a storyline is not really aligned? So that's the kind of more specific bit. And then hopefully we have an open discussion. At some stage there's a break here, depending on how that falls. But generally, convention was doing this presentation, having a break, and then having the open discussion with the group. So it's actually quite insightful. So you learn about the field, but also about the specific papers, depending how many you want to pick. Some people just take particular cases, example of a serious game, right? So as opposed to necessarily a paper, sometimes they look at games, but then you're in the task to figure that out on your own, right? So if you don't have a evaluation attached to it, right? So you need to think about how you present this and give it credibility. So it's sometimes a bit challenging. People have tried this and I think
and failed.
Well, that's fine. I mean, a failure is how we learn. I fail every session. Yeah, that's why I learn. So, right, okay. So what's important here? Well, we have the papers. We have specific papers. The relationship between those, and that's the other thing. Remote participants, that may affect some of you. I think Caroline is usually attending remote, you may be attending remote and so on. We also take you guys into account, so I kind of read out the Discord questions that come up in the discussion, so we can bring them in the vote as well. So it's important. It's important that there's some opportunity for remote participation. I appreciate, however, that's not entirely simple. Good, cool. So the organizational aspects. Once you have figured out which paper you want, again we work with issue tracking. So please, after negotiation, you can publish the paper or a link to it rather in the issues again, using this syntax. So it's kind of uniform topic, the date of the lecture, so people know when you actually talk, and just call a specific paper and label it accordingly with the specific paper label. It really makes life easier to get a quick overview and go back and so on. Cool. What else do I want to think about? Right. So now I just gave you what you need to do, but I didn't tell you how you can probably approach this and how we can make your life easier, because that's what this session is actually about. So, more general pointers. If you read papers, in general, in practice, sometimes it's hard to contextualize. Where do I get started? How do I figure out, first of all, which field they're in? Perhaps you figured that out already based on your own search term, or the title and so on. But sometimes really hard. Keywords also one. But if you really struggle to figure out where does it sit, right? Where is it discussed? Because sometimes the paper may have education in the title, but it's actually discussed only in the context of science education, because the content is science education. So sometimes it's useful to see how papers are cited, right? What is the use of those papers in the wider scientific discourse? And that gives you a feel, those kind of people look at this particular paper. So just more like general hints if you want to know how to get started in terms of finding a paper and evaluating it. Well, the rest is relatively evident, self-evident and straightforward. I just want to highlight this highlight this for a bit. In terms of the presented paper, I put some guiding questions here that could highlight or help you a bit structure your discussion. So generally when we read a paper, we I guess, and Runa may have, I'm not sure if you share views, but we generally look for the general contribution. And guess where we look for the general contribution? Anyone? If you read a paper, where do you look for the contribution?
What kind of contribution?
Scientific contribution. Sorry, research paper. Not blog post.
Conclusions.
Yeah, where else? The only place?
Methods used.
Good, yeah. Yeah, there can be something there, yeah.
Abstract.
Aha, abstract. Why in the abstract? That's the shortest piece. Why is it there?
If it was well written.
If it was, well, if it's not, then it's probably not a well-written paper. So,
Right.
so why in the abstract?
Because it gives a short introduction to what the research paper aims to do.
Exactly, precisely, right? If you can't read from the abstract what the contribution of the paper is, carefully review the paper. It may not be the best choice you could take. So abstract, right? The shortest bit gives the one of them should give all the conclusive insights, right? So it should also give insights about the method used, most likely, not necessarily always, but should be. So that's quite important. So the other aspect is. Sometimes people draw interesting conclusions about the paper, about the general field. And sometimes you need to look at the paper and say, okay, is this piece of work enough to make those claims, right? So there's a bit of an incongruence between our paper has furthered the, development on theory in the context of science education, right? And they do that based on one experiment with 8 people. That, there's a bit of a bold claim there, especially if you claim theory extension. So that's sometimes worthwhile looking at. Title and abstract, just more pointed out. The other aspect that's important, how reproducible, and that's, I'm picking up on this in a bit, how reproducible are those results? So if you were to be in the task of saying, hey, I'm running this serious games experiment, the evaluation, how far would I get doing this? Right, so just as a thought experiment, not necessarily, of course, by doing it. That'd be an interesting exercise. But just, is it possible based on the description that we get? So paper needs to be sufficiently descriptive. And the other aspect is, do you actually need gamification in the paper? But I think that's, it's not always clear, because sometimes you wonder yourself, okay, could you have done it with all that gamification stuff and just put a different title and keywords to it? So it's worthwhile bearing this in mind. I linked a general overview for sensible heuristics for good and bad papers. So it's taken from a journal article in energy research and social science. So really nice. But they actually have a really good, it's a really nice overview in terms of how they do it there, and I think it completely applies to us, right? So here's really what good papers do, what bad papers do, and it's with respect to various sections of the paper, right? So an abstract, for example, should clearly state research objectives, methods, findings, and so on, limitations, future directions. A bad abstract focuses only on 1 or 2 aspects of the manuscript, right? I don't know, we did a randomized control trial in the area of education for serious games. Okay, well done, and so on. What do we learn? What's the sample size? Right? So what theory do you learn? Also, good heuristic. I like this heuristic. A bad abstract is full of typos or repeated within the text itself. So sometimes people just take the abstract and it kind of appears in the instruction again, or sometimes the introduction is the abstract. I don't know, one of those. I don't know the order there. It's probably an iterative downwards
in this paper we will.
That's right. Exactly. So that's good. But I think you can read it for yourself. It's quite worthwhile looking for it. Having a messy introduction. If we present the core argument too late, you want to know early why you're reading this paper, right? Not know about the field first and then learn why you're reading this paper. But of course, there's a bit of an iterative cycle that you need to say, hey, that's what we want to do. Here's the field. Now, again, let us refine what you want to do. You want to have a clear storyline. And perhaps the research design is not well specified. So anyway, I think this is more like kind of a checklist. I would think you can apply if you look at papers and ask yourself whether they're good or bad. The good part about this, by reviewing this, so when it goes through the entire paper, by reviewing this, you can quickly develop a assessment of the paper you're going to evaluate. Do I really want to use this specific paper? Is it, does it have issues in this direction anyway? But even if it's largely okay and you want to use this for your discussion because the case is so interesting, this gives you a good primer for issues with the paper, right? So again, it's also about discussion of the pros and cons. So you have some sort of checklist or characteristics that are helpful in doing so. So so that's perhaps one aspect I want to highlight briefly about the results. That's something quite interesting. A good paper actually interprets the data. Basically, it's sense making, right? It looks at the data that you got from a control trial or whatever else, and says, what does it actually mean in the context of course, the domain and subject we're working on, but in a wider sense. And sometimes you find this in master or whatever thesis quite often. Oh, we did an analysis, blah blah blah. Here are the data. Good luck. Right, so you're kind of more like you are left to analysis, but you evidently have some data, of course. So as far as the checklist in terms of research is done, yes, they did some sort of data collection, but the interpretation, what does it mean, is a quite essential one that you sometimes see missing. Good. Okay, I'll leave it this because it's really linked. In fact, all the resources are linked anyway. This is an extract of a wider paper. The literature analysis resources. I have weird titles there. I don't know how to make them better. If you have better ideas, let me know for those pages. I want to have them as descriptive as possible, but sometimes that goes against my intuition. It's that paper here. If you want to go through this thing, it's quite extensive though in terms of discussion because it really looks at rigorous research in this entire field. So, but I wouldn't say, but anyway, it's taken from there. In fact, all the papers I'm going to talk about today are pretty much those three ones in one way or another, plus one master thesis. We'll get to that. So they should be all listed here. But again, coming back to the general guidelines, at the bottom there's a more general so that's more high-level perspective. What's really important, but if you have not analyzed the paper before, this is probably the more comprehensive pathway of doing so, right? So it looks in by Viringa and Nix at Ali. And the idea is basically, what's the research question? What's the unit of study? What are you looking at? What are relevant concepts, meaning what's the background theory? What did other people do? What's the objective of the very research, right? So, and then there's perhaps some questions that are relevant if you're looking more specifically at serious games. And that's, of course, important in this domain. If you look at the paper or game, can you identify the category, of course? Well, within the category, is there a subcategory that they actually identify? Again, training games can be anything, right? So it could be very much on the cognitive side. It can pretty much be an industrial side. It can be health and safety, as we have one example in resources and so on. So important to figure out what that actually means. How broad or narrow is the kind of field describing? What's the target audience? So who plays that game, right? So it's very important to figure that out. In fact, that's important for you as soon as you have a game. Who's the audience? And how general specific. Or in the widest sense, who is the customer? That's another one. Isn't that the same? Audience and customer?
Not necessarily, as maybe for, as you said earlier, training game, which the customer would be like the military or government, and then the audience would be like the astronaut or some.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, helicopter pilot or something like that.
Exactly, right? So it's like, the organization that basically needs to fund this health and safety training will pay for it, but the target audience, of course, their employees. Another example is advertising, right? So who's the actual customer? Well, it's probably advertisers, but who's playing the game? Well, the consumers. So there's also a bit of a dissonance there. Sometimes quite interesting to see the dynamics, and it gives you a bit of a pathway. Is that actually a serious? No, what do you say? Not serious game. A honest serious game. I say reputable or commendable serious game as opposed to a scammy one, right? Which just uses you in your playtime for either data collection or advertisement. So it's something that those questions help to dissect a bit. But anyway, those are just pointers. They again all listed under the guidelines there. Just iterate through them at your own pace and time and whenever you need. So, but they should all be there. If you have ideas for extension or you think, oh hey, why we should also ask look at this question, please suggest it or amend it accordingly, or raise an issue, or think if you have concerns, just make an issue out of it. Okay. General sources, introductory sources. Yes, right. So, okay. So your task is quite clear, and I nearly wasted an hour on this one. That's not desirable, but happens at times. Do you want to have a break first, or should I continue with talking about systematic literature reviews and what they are?
Short break, maybe?
Short break. Okay, I'll give you until 13:04. 4 minutes after 1. That's good.
8 minutes.
8 minutes is good, right? 8 minutes is sensible. I think so.
Yeah.
It's more than
That is a round number.
it is. I want to.
Both on top and the bottom.